Hi everyone, and welcome back to Women of Worth. Today we're diving into a topic that so many of us wrestle with, balancing work and family. Whether you're running meetings, managing deadlines, or helping with homework, it can feel like there's never enough time in the day. Sound familiar? Here's the truth, finding balance doesn't mean you have to do it all or do it perfectly. It's about creating a rhythm that works for you and allows you to thrive at work and at home. In this episode, we'll explore the challenges women face, like guilt, time constraints, and unrealistic expectations. But we'll also dive into practical solutions to help you take back control of your time, simplify your life, and reconnect with what matters most. Plus, we'll hear inspiring stories from women who made big changes to find their harmony. If you're ready to learn how to create a life that works for both your career and your family, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an episode. And tell us in the comments, what's your biggest struggle when it comes to balancing work and family? We'd love to hear from you. Let's dive in and discover how you can build a routine that brings joy, success, and balance into your life.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to, and that's finding that balance, between work and family life. And particularly as women, I think it's something that we all struggle with, no matter what stage of life we're in. Or a CEO of a company, or you're a stay-at-home parent, or you're somewhere in between. It's something that we're all constantly trying to figure out.
It really is. And I think what makes today's topic so interesting is that we're looking at some source material that really focuses on actionable solutions that women can use to find that harmony in their lives. It's not about, surviving, but it's about really thriving and acknowledging those systemic issues that women face, like time constraints, the pressure to be everything to everyone, and of course the guilt that comes along with that, but then offering those practical ways to navigate all of that.
I love that, because it really is about equipping ourselves with those tools and strategy, not about trying to find some sort of magical formula. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of solutions, let's just start with the foundation. What does balance even mean in this context?
Right, because balance is not about perfectly dividing your time between work and family. It's more about a sense of harmony, where you feel fulfilled in both of those areas without, sacrificing your own well-being. And the source material makes this really compelling argument that true balance is less about having those, rigid schedules and more about creating a dynamic system that allows you to adapt and prioritize effectively.
Oh, that makes so much sense, because it's not about some unattainable ideal, but it's about finding that rhythm that works for you. In your own circumstances. And when we talk about dynamic system, can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of it like this. Instead of trying to maintain that perfectly equal scale between work and family, which, let's be honest, is almost impossible, it's more about you're learning to adjust the weights as needed. So sometimes work might demand more attention, and other times family is going to take priority. The key is having those systems and strategies in place that allow you to shift those weights smoothly without feeling like you're constantly losing control.
I love that analogy. So we're not aiming for, a static split. We're aiming for something a lot more fluid, a lot more responsive. Now, before we get into some of the specific solutions that are in this source material, I think we have to acknowledge, the elephant in the room. Why are we having this conversation about women? Isn't work-life balance a challenge that we all face?
You're absolutely right. Everyone faces challenges when it comes to balancing work and family. But as our source material highlights, women often encounter those unique obstacles that are rooted in, societal expectations and gender roles. And it's important to point out that these aren't personal shortcomings, but these are systemic issues that need to be recognized.
It's such a crucial point. So what are some of those systemic issues that specifically impact women?
So the source outlines 4 primary challenges, and those are unrealistic expectations, constant time constraints, unequal division of responsibilities at home, and of course the feeling of guilt that comes with all of that.
Let's unpack that a little bit. I think a lot of us listening can relate to feeling those pressures, but sometimes I think just hearing them articulated can be really validating.
For sure, and it helps us realize that we're not alone in these struggles. So let's start with unrealistic expectations. Society puts this immense pressure on women to excel in their careers, while simultaneously being that perfect homemaker, caregiver, and mother. It's like having, multiple full-time jobs with zero downtime.
It's true. And those expectations aren't really placed on men in the same way. So it is this unspoken double standard that can be incredibly frustrating.
Exactly. And, that constant pressure combined with time constraints of juggling work deadlines, family obligations, maybe even trying to squeeze in some self-care, that can lead to, chronic stress and feeling totally overwhelmed.
And then to add on top of all of that, there's often this unequal division of responsibility at home. Studies show that even when women work full-time, they still tend to shoulder, the majority of those household chores and childcare.
Right. It's like having a second unpaid shift waiting for you at home.
Exactly.
And it's incredibly draining, both physically and emotionally. And that ties into that final challenge, which is the pervasive guilt that so many women experience. It's that feeling of, never quite doing enough, of constantly falling short in one area or another.
I think many of our listeners are nodding their heads right now because that guilt can be such a heavy burden to carry.
It can. It really can. And it can make us question our choices, our priorities, and, even our own worth.
So we've kind of painted this pretty stark picture of challenges, but I'm hoping that the source material doesn't leave us hanging. Is there hope for finding balance?
Absolutely. What's so inspiring about this is the focus on practical strategies and real-life examples. We hear stories of women who have successfully navigated all of this, and it offers tangible steps that our listeners can take to create that harmony.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these solutions. So what's the first step towards finding that balance?
Well, the source emphasizes that the first step is really redefining your understanding of balance. It's not about striving for perfection, but it's about finding that sustainable rhythm that works for you. And that starts with setting clear priorities.
Okay, that sounds simple enough in theory, but I think a lot of us struggle with figuring out what those priorities actually are. So how do we do that?
The source recommends taking a step back and really reflecting on your values, your goals. What truly brings you joy and fulfillment? Ask yourself, what are the non-negotiables in your life? What are the things you can delegate or outsource or even let go of?
I think that's such a great point because it's about recognizing what's truly essential versus, what's adding to the feeling of overwhelm. There's that quote, isn't there? That what you focus on expands. And I think if we're constantly scattered trying to do it all, nothing really gets our full attention.
Absolutely. And once you've identified those core priorities, the source suggests creating a visual representation of them. So whether that's a mind map or a list, maybe even a vision board, but having that tangible reminder of what matters most can really help guide those decisions and actions.
I love that idea, creating a roadmap for ourselves.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, life throws curveballs.
Yeah.
So how do we maintain that balance when those unexpected things pop up?
That's where the concept of flexibility comes in. Remember that dynamic system we talked about? It's all about building in buffers, having those backup plans, being willing to adjust your schedule when you need to.
So it's not about clinging to that rigid timetable. We have to be more adaptable.
Exactly. And the source really emphasizes that. Flexibility isn't about being passive or reactive, but it's about being proactive and empowered. It's having those tools and systems in place to really handle, whatever life throws at you.
That's such a good way to look at it. So it's not about, giving up control, but it's about gaining a different kind of control. So for those of us who have demanding jobs or, unpredictable family schedules, what are some practical ways we can build in that flexibility?
The source offers several really concrete strategies. One that resonated with me was the idea of time blocking. It's about allocating specific blocks of time for different tasks and activities, rather than, trying to multitask your way through the day.
I've heard of time blocking. But to be honest, it always seemed a bit intimidating because it just feels so structured.
I understand your hesitation. But, think of time blocking as a framework, not a straitjacket. It's about creating those intentional pockets of time for the things that matter most, while still allowing for flexibility within those blocks. So, for example, you might schedule a 2-hour block for work in the morning. But within that block, you can, adjust your focus based on what needs attention.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's about creating structure without sacrificing the adaptability.
Right. And the source also highlights the importance of having backup plans, especially if you have young children or family members who rely on you. So whether that's a trusted babysitter, a network of friends or family, Or even just, a flexible work arrangement. But having those safety nets in place can really reduce that stress and allow you to navigate those unexpected challenges a little bit easier.
It's like having those lifelines, so that when those inevitable things happen, you're not scrambling to figure it out. Okay, so we've talked about priorities and flexibility. What's the next key ingredient in this balance equation?
Communication. The source really stresses how important it is to have open and honest communication with your partner, your family, and even your employer. It's about expressing your needs, setting boundaries, and working together to create that supportive environment.
This is where I think it gets tricky for a lot of women. We're often conditioned to put others' needs before our own, to be the pleasers and the fixers. So asking for what we need can feel selfish or confrontational.
That's such an important point. Societal expectations can make it so difficult for women to assert their needs, both at home and at work. But the source really emphasizes that setting boundaries and communicating clearly are essential for protecting your time and energy, and ultimately your well-being.
So it's not about being demanding or aggressive, but it's about advocating for ourselves in a way that's respectful and assertive.
Yes, and it's about framing those conversations in a way that focuses on collaboration and shared responsibility. So, for example, instead of saying, I need you to do more around the house, you could say, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything on my plate. Can we talk about how to better divide these tasks so that we both feel supported?
That's a great example. So it's about shifting from blame to partnership.
Exactly.
And I imagine that this applies to communication in the workplace as well.
It does. The source highlights several examples of women who've successfully negotiated flexible work arrangements, adjusted their schedules, or simply clarified expectations with their supervisors just by having those open and honest conversations.
That's so inspiring. It shows that it is possible to challenge the status quo and create that positive change.
It is. And, those conversations can have a ripple effect. Create more supportive and equitable workplaces for everyone.
Okay, so we've covered priorities, flexibility, and communication. What other tools does this source material give us?
Well, this next one might seem obvious, but it's often overlooked. And that is simplifying and streamlining your responsibilities, both at home and at work. It's about finding ways to eliminate those unnecessary tasks, automate those routine processes, and delegate whenever possible.
I think we're all guilty of this sometimes. Overcomplicating things.
Yeah.
Trying to do everything ourselves. Holding on to those tasks that we could easily delegate or outsource.
It's true. We fall into that trap of thinking we have to do it all and we have to do it perfectly. But as the source reminds us, perfection is often the enemy of progress.
So it's about letting go of that need for control, that idea that we have to be superhuman to be successful. So how do we do that? How do we simplify and reclaim our time and energy?
Well, the source is packed with great tips. It encourages listeners to think about their daily routines and identify those areas where they can streamline those processes. So, for example, could you batch cook meals on the weekend to free up those weeknights? Could you utilize online grocery delivery services to save those precious hours at the store? Could you create a chore chart to distribute those household tasks more equitably?
Those are great ideas, finding those little hacks that free up some mental space.
I think reclaiming that time and energy can have a huge impact on our overall well-being.
Totally. When we're not constantly feeling overwhelmed and behind, we have more bandwidth to focus on the things that really matter, our relationships, our passions, and taking care of ourselves.
And speaking of self-care, the source dedicates a whole section to the importance of prioritizing our own well-being.
Okay, this is where I need to take notes, because self-care often feels like a luxury, something we squeeze in if we have time. Which, let's be honest, is rarely the case. So how does the source material approach this?
It reframes self-care as a necessity, not an indulgence. It emphasizes that taking care of ourselves, physically, emotionally, and mentally, isn't selfish, but essential for being able to show up for our families, our work, and ourselves.
I love that shift in perspective. We can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. And the source doesn't just talk about self-care in this vague, aspirational way. It offers some concrete strategies for how to integrate it into our daily lives.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
It encourages listeners to identify those activities that bring them joy and rejuvenation, whether it's, a hot bath, a walk in nature, reading a good book, or just spending time with friends. And it really emphasizes that even small pockets of self-care can make a big difference. It's not about those grand gestures. It's about those consistent small acts of kindness towards ourselves.
This is all resonating so much. It's about giving ourselves permission to prioritize our own well-being, to make those investments in ourselves. But I have to ask, Even with all these amazing strategies, doesn't that guilt creep in?
It does. You're right. Guilt can be a powerful and persistent force. But the source acknowledges this and offers this really powerful antidote, challenging those negative thoughts and reframing our narratives.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Absolutely. So let's say you're feeling guilty because you had to work late and missed your kid's soccer game. Instead of, beating yourself up about it, challenge that thought. Ask yourself, is this a pattern or is this a one-time occurrence? Have I consistently shown up for my child in other ways? Am I doing the best I can given my current circumstances?
That's such a good way to look at it. Replacing those negative self-critical thoughts. Balanced and compassionate ones.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes that this is an ongoing practice. We need to consistently challenge those guilt-inducing thoughts and replace them with more empowering narratives.
It's like taking control of our thoughts and choosing to focus on the positive rather than dwelling on those perceived shortcomings.
Right. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most important solution that's offered by the source. And that is building a strong support system.
I knew we'd get there. Tell me more about how this source material emphasizes that support.
It stresses that we weren't meant to do this alone. Having that network of people we can rely on, whether it's family or friends or colleagues, or even a professional therapist or coach, can really make all the difference in our ability to navigate those challenges and find balance.
I think so many of us try to do it all on our own, but it's about sharing the load, offering that encouragement, and reminding each other that we're not alone in this. So how can we cultivate those connections?
The source encourages us to be proactive, nurture those existing relationships, and seek out new connections. It highlights the power of joining groups and communities of like-minded individuals who can offer that support and advice and share those experiences.
So whether that's a local moms group, an online forum, or just a regular coffee date with a friend who gets it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the source reminds us that, seeking professional support from a therapist or coach can also be incredibly beneficial, especially when we're dealing with those feelings of overwhelm or anxiety or guilt.
It's about recognizing that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's a strength. It's about prioritizing our mental and emotional well-being. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the unique challenges that women face in balancing work and family, and we've uncovered so many practical solutions and strategies. I'm feeling really inspired. So what are some key takeaways that you hope our listeners are walking away with?
I think one of the most important takeaways is that, finding balance is an ongoing journey, not a destination. It's that process of continuous adjustment, self-reflection, and compassionate self-care. And it's about recognizing that we're not alone. There are resources available. There are people who care. And there is a path to finding that harmony that feels right for you.
Beautifully said. It's about embracing the messiness, the imperfections, and the constant evolution of this whole balance equation, and celebrating those wins, big and small. Now, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift gears a bit and explore some real-life stories of women who have successfully navigated these challenges and created lives that feel both fulfilling and sustainable.
I think it's time to bring it all to life with some real stories. I'm excited to hear how these strategies actually play out in the lives of real women.
You know what's so powerful about the source material is that it features stories of women from all different backgrounds and with different experiences, each of them navigating this whole balance thing in their own way.
Yeah.
And it's not about presenting some, unattainable ideal. It's about showing that messy but beautiful reality of figuring out what works. I love that. It's about, celebrating those individual approaches and finding inspiration in the shared struggles. So who do we meet first in this tapestry of experiences?
Well, the source material introduces us to Julie, a working mom who was feeling so overwhelmed by the demands of her job. It was high pressure, and she wanted to be there for her young daughter. She was caught in that, classic trap of trying to do it all and feeling like she was failing at everything.
It's so relatable. I think so many of us have been there. That constant tug of war between wanting to be successful in our careers, but also being present and engaged parents. So how did Julie start to find her way back to a sense of balance?
I think her turning point came when she realized she needed to kind of redefine what success meant for her. She had bought into this idea that success meant being the perfect employee and the perfect mother, and that's just not sustainable.
It's that myth of the superwoman that so many of us, I think, try to live up to. So how did she break free from that?
She started by getting really clear on her values and priorities. She realized that spending quality time with her daughter was non-negotiable, and that her career, while important, didn't have to consume every waking moment.
That's such a powerful shift in thinking, choosing to prioritize what really matters.
Exactly. And from there, she started using some practical strategies, things like time blocking, setting boundaries with work, and delegating household tasks to her partner. She also made it a point to prioritize her own self-care, even if it was just, a 20-minute walk in the evening to clear her head.
It's amazing how those small acts of self-care can really add up and make such a difference. So what kind of impact did all of this have on Julie's life?
Well, she describes feeling this sense of calm and clarity that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't constantly rushing and feeling frazzled and resentful. She was more present with her daughter, more focused at work, and just more connected to herself.
That's so inspiring. It really shows the power of slowing down, setting boundaries, and taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, who else do we meet on this journey?
The source introduces us to Beatrice, a woman who actually decided to leave her corporate job to pursue a more flexible career path as a freelance writer. She really wanted a career that allowed her to be more present for her family, but also, still pursue her passions.
That's a big decision. A lot of us, dream of having that kind of flexibility, but it can feel so scary to step away from that traditional career path. What were some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, one of the biggest challenges was navigating the financial uncertainty that can come with freelance work. She had to be very disciplined with her budgeting and her time management to make sure she was earning a sustainable income.
That's a really valid concern. So how did she manage that?
She set really clear financial goals, created a detailed budget, and really put herself out there to network and build her client base. And she really prioritized her time, using time blocking and batch working strategies to get things done.
So she took all of those entrepreneurial skills and really created a career that aligned with her values. How did this shift impact her overall sense of balance?
Well, Beatrice says she felt this sense of liberation that she hadn't felt in her corporate job. She loved having the flexibility to set her own hours, work from home, and be more available for her family. And she found so much satisfaction in building a successful business on her own terms.
That's such a powerful example of how redefining work can lead to a more balanced life. It's not always about choosing between work and family, but about figuring out how to integrate them in a way that feels good and sustainable for you. All right, I'm ready to hear about our final balance warrior. Who's next?
This time we meet Candice, a single mom working as a nurse. And she was really struggling with guilt and overwhelm, constantly torn between the demands of her job and her desire to be a good mom.
That's a situation that I think a lot of single parents can relate to, that pressure of being both the provider and the caregiver. How did Candice start to deal with those challenges?
She started by asking for help. She found a local single parents group and connected with other women who understood her struggles, and they were able to offer encouragement and advice.
It's amazing how those connections can make all the difference. Sometimes we forget that we don't have to do everything on our own. What other strategies did she use?
She realized that, asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. It was actually a strength. So she started delegating tasks to her older kids. She reached out to her support network for help with childcare. And she had a really honest conversation with her supervisor about needing a more predictable work schedule.
I love how she embraced her vulnerability, asked for support, and advocated for her needs. What kind of impact did this have on her sense of balance?
Well, she said she felt this huge sense of relief. She realized that, she didn't have to be superhuman, that it was okay to ask for help, and that she was still a good mom even if she couldn't do it all by herself. She also found that her workplace was a lot more supportive than she thought, and that her colleagues were willing to help her create a schedule that worked for everyone.
These stories are so inspiring. They show that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to finding balance. It's about figuring out your own values and priorities, embracing flexibility, communicating your needs, and building a supportive community.
Absolutely. And what they also highlight is that finding balance isn't about achieving perfection. It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling, a life that honors both your personal and professional goals.
This has been such a great deep dive. I hope our listeners are walking away with some practical strategies, renewed hope, and a sense of empowerment. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. There are resources available, there are people who care, and there is definitely a path to finding that sense of harmony that feels right for you. We encourage you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might also find it valuable. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.